war was declared in 1939. We were evacuated out near Rugby to the country. They had this big old house where we were evacuated into. I was brought up in a convent. I went to boarding school at 7 and came out at 17. I was not an easy child. I was a deviant. And it wasn't intentional. And the way my head worked was different from the way other people's head worked. I can remember making my first communion and expecting that God would come into my heart and that everything would be explained. And he didn't. And I had a massive disappointment. And from then on, I became enormously interested in where energy came from. And I'm still enormously interested in where energy came from because that's the heart of our theory. And what I write about now is that energy is universal. It's not ours. It's not anybody's. It's in black holes, and it's in you and in me. And it's the source of everything.
That's one of the things that's very nice about the theory Yvonne has developed. It's a set of ideas. But the ideas are like a lens, like a camera lens, really. And they enable one to see the world through that lens. And then the test of the theory is, does seeing the world through that lens enable you to take membership in the world differently by seeing it that way? For us, the answer is yes. Also, for us, it's always an open question. And we ask people to test it out for themselves. Each time to find out, if you see the world this way, does it enable you to be more of yourself, and as with more of yourself, contribute as a member wherever you are? And if it is, maybe it's worth learning, and if it isn't, maybe it's worth throwing away. That has to be an open question always.
It's a way of looking at the world which is more interested in us than just me. So it's taking a perspective that looks at us all as human animals that behave in certain ways, particularly when we're with each other. And they are designed to, on the one hand, help us survive. And when possible, when we feel we have the opportunity to do more than just survive, then we will look for opportunities to develop and over time transform. So the theory of living human systems looks at that as an overview and makes some statements about what happens, under what circumstances, and following from that we have SET, which is how to influence those systems so that people are more free to develop, and so they don't have to stay in survival as a major goal in their lives.
What it does for me is it kind of gives an overall theory, a map of any kind of human system that enables us to look at what's happening and put it against that map, and then to come up with hypotheses about what we think might be happening in relation to where we're trying to get to, and then make an intervention, do something to see what difference it makes.
I have watched the theory and the practice grow from a seed of ideas into a really comprehensive, consolidated theory with operational definitions, with methods, with techniques that we work with people using. And then also part of that was developing a training program so we could teach other people how to do this work authentically, in contact with each other. And then we built an organization. And then, like any organization or any theory that starts to develop to this point, there's always a pressure to make it rigid. And if there was one thing I got from Yvonne, was how to keep challenging that.
The theory came first, and the practice of system-centered therapy came second. So every time you say something or do something within a system-centered frame, you are actually testing out the validity of the theory and the reliability of its practice.
I got in contact with Yvonne in 1980. She was teaching courses. I was interested. And she started the group by looking down at the ground. And I thought, this is weird. But it was interesting. What was interesting to me then is she was working with the group as a whole way of looking, and was in the process of writing something called the Visible and Invisible Group. And what she was talking about is how, in a way, there's the group that you might see apparently, but there was an invisible group of the dynamics in the group and the roles in the group and things like that. And that finally made sense of the experience I'd had all my life. I always thought the problem was with me, but it turns out I was only one piece of it.
The thing that really got me the very first time is I was free not to be caught in myself. I learned how to not take what I felt or what I said or what I thought as just personal about me. So I learned to hear it as a voice for the group. And there's a liberation there. One doesn't get caught in oneself, and that was great for me.
The very first time I went to the York Training Week, which was over 20 years ago, I sat and listened to Yvonne in the first theory session, and I just thought, wow, here is somebody finally speaking a language I understand. It was a big emotional experience. I still get emotional when I talk about it because it had such a big apprehensive effect. It's kind of like setting off down a fork in the road, having discovered it and not ever seen it before, and just kind of knowing that was the direction.
In 1990, I was working in a therapeutic community for adolescents. And the idea is that you create a living, learning environment in which you live an experience and then you learn from it as you go. I was interested in using the power of groups to help people. The director at the time met Yvonne at a conference in America and asked her to do a day for staff from therapeutic communities all around the UK. And so that's when I first met Yvonne. It was in 1990. And I was struck with the method. What I saw was the group moved more in a day than other groups I've been part of that moved in a much, much longer period.
We've developed a theory that requires people to be able to objectify as well as subjectify. And if you take things personally, of course, you're subjective. And then the most important part of this recent theory is that the driving force of taking things personally is that you are in a survival mode and you've closed your boundaries. So you don't let anything else in. So you don't get disrupted by differences that you can't integrate.
The heart of the theory of living human systems is an understanding of us as human beings' reaction to difference. So essentially, we don't like differences. We particularly don't like the differences we don't have control over, because that's when we really feel it as a difference, when it's enforced on us. So what we tend to do is we keep differences out. And we can do that in a million ways. We can pretend it's not happening. We can say they've been talking about doing these changes forever, so why should it happen now? We can sabotage the changes. We can complain and blame and attack. Or we can get depressed.
When you have a reaction, what is that telling you about the system if you don't take it personally? So if you constantly stay curious about your own reactions, not say it's them, not say it's me, say actually this is part of this system, then you've got information. What you then do next with it is a different matter, but you've got the information, and then you can stay curious and see what emerges.
If you think of something simple like a work team, there might be people who talk more slowly and come in more slowly. And there are people who talk fast and get in a hurry and break in and have lots to say. Okay. And both of those are potential resources. And often what will happen in the work team is the fast talkers dominate the meeting, and the slow talkers get more and more quiet. And if one recognizes there are two differences that need to come in, then the fast talkers can learn to make room for the slow talkers. And the slow talkers start to often bring in the underlying emotion that's essential to understand for the system to really develop. And the fast talkers keep moving the system toward its stated goal. Both energies are really essential.
If you discriminate and recognize differences and can integrate them, then you automatically survive, develop, and transform from simpler to more complex. That's the only dynamic you need to know if you're doing systems.
In an SCT group, we train people to subgroup. We call it functional subgrouping. And functional subgrouping means instead of reacting to someone who's different than me, I find people who are similar in their experience to me in the group. And I join them, and they join me. And in that climate of similarity, we both relax. And we open to small differences between us. And people who are holding a difference do the same thing. So that instead of reacting to difference, which is the human tendency, we react to difference, we do what we call close our boundaries to it. Or we criticize the difference, or we try to get rid of the difference. Instead of reacting to it, we make room for the difference in a different subgroup.
In the context of the theory, subgrouping is a construct and a method. And it's designed to influence the communication in a group so that they don't argue over differences or clash inevitably. I mean, we all don't like differences at some level. They're irritating. So what subgrouping does is deliberately influences the communication so that similarities are worked with in one subgroup and differences are worked in another. And then when there's an integration in the larger group, it's more complex. And when it's more complex, the system as a whole has more resources in the system in order to be able to solve the problems on their path to the goal.
If any group or team can learn how to do that effectively, then whatever work they've got to do, they'll be able to do it. Because it just so fundamentally changes the way that we organise the information that's available. Keeps all the information present and has it available to make use of. So it's the first thing that I do when I work with a group or a team. And that's what I would teach them.
When we're working in a subgroup, where there's some similarity, we do get the felt sense that we're not alone, that we're understood, that others have similar problems, and the whole system can relax. When the whole system can relax, then the boundaries can open, new information can come in, and everybody, each individual, each subgroup, the group can grow.
Like right now, I see that you've understood me. I relax a little. And then I get more open to discover and hear whatever it is you're going to say next, even if it's a little different than where I am. And when you get a puzzled look on your face, I can feel myself not quite as relaxed because I don't yet know that you're understanding. So differences are as small as that, whether someone understands what we're saying.
Eye contact, voice tone, rhythm, pitch, mirroring each other. So if you nod, I'm nodding perhaps, but I'm not doing it to mimic you. I'm doing it because we've set up a relationship in which there is a give and a get. There's a rhythm between us.
Subgrouping requires me to really listen to you well enough so that I can reflect. For example, you just asked me what impact SCT might have on the world today. Do you feel understood? That feels good, doesn't it? Okay. So the reflection worked. You felt joined, and you felt that I had really understood you, and that I'd paid attention to you and not to me. And then I need to take my attention away from you. But because I've really related to you, that actually isn't so easy. So what we usually do in everyday life is not make that connection. So what functional subgrouping does, it's an exercise in separation individuation. Because first you join and really connect like we are right now. And then I have to separate and see what I want to say. There's grief. There's deep, deep grief that we don't really talk to each other and relate to each other. I suppose at the bottom of that is grief that I'm not related to. But then that's just another developmental step, isn't it?
In our world, we fight wars over difference. We're in a mess as a world over difference. We just try to blow people up over difference.
With functional subgrouping, you can't just fight. You can't just hate people. You sit down and you explore.
The challenge is people have to be willing to cooperate with it. And if people cooperate with subgrouping, they do integrate differences. And then decisions get made on an integration of differences rather than a splitting off from differences.
So that you develop this connection back to the ways in which all of us as human beings have the same challenges around survival, and we have the same challenges around development and transformation. Everybody does everywhere. Those don't change depending on the country you live in or anything else like that. But if people communicate this way, or are contentious or try to bully each other, we don't get very far. But with functional subgrouping, people build a context where they can connect to the similarities, and then they can start to look at the differences.
You can only work when you accept reality. Inside yourself, without words, with the energy, and between us at all levels of the hierarchy. It's the only way we can do anything. And if we look at politicians, for example, we know that they can't do anything because they're not in a system that's based on what the goals are.
It's not easy. You have to learn it. It takes practice, it takes discipline, it takes self-discovery. And that reality is a challenge for people. The other side, though, is I think when we can learn these skills and develop ourselves, what it does offer is the potential for a conflict resolution method. My own experience of that is when it's really done with conviction, that differences can be integrated. We live in a world which is, well, I don't need to say it, so full of conflict. And the conflict is generated by differences of belief or ideology of all shapes and sizes. And if SCT could offer a way of helping people resolve the conflict that comes from differences, that would be a tremendous contribution.
The answer is explore. Keep exploring. We know that if we take ourselves beyond our familiar boundaries, we get uncomfortable, and it's us. It's really, I think, for all of us, it's what's the boundary that is just not too uncomfortable for us to cross, and then explore and see what we discover.
So how do we communicate in a way that's likely to cross the boundary? How I say something is going to influence whether or not your boundary is open to what I'm saying. And if I say it without any emotional connection to it, it's going to be harder for your boundary to stay open. If I say it where there's nothing but emotion and there's hardly any boundary, it's also going to be hard for your boundary to stay open. So if I talk very vaguely and ambiguously, you're going to quit listening to me pretty soon. Another one, there's ambiguity. Another one is redundancy. If I keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, and I don't put in any new information, and I just keep talking about it, and I go on about it, pretty soon you're gone, because I've put redundancy in. And we say that explanations are redundant, because explanations mean we're saying something we've already thought before. And that's in contrast to exploration, which is getting to know what we don't yet know, and takes us to the edge of the unknown. And the edge of the unknown is where all potential is. And it's also the place that's hardest for us to live as human beings. We like to live as if we know, and in reality, we actually never know.
All our new knowledge comes from energy. The point about energy is it's right at the edge of the unknown. Can you sit at the edge of the unknown and just see what you discover? And just stay with me if it gets scary, and we'll do it together. People don't think systems easily. You know, people are in training for 10 years and they start to be able to do it. So it's not what I thought it was going to be, which was a short-term therapy. It's not. It's a lifelong. I'm still working on myself. I'm sure you are too. I think the war had a very, very significant impact on me. The courage of people in London under the bombing, how much we helped each other when we were in the streets. The Battle of Britain, where pilots who came over to us one weekend didn't come the next weekend, and one didn't ask because they'd been killed. My own brothers. So I think in my heart, no, deeper than that, in my guts, it's the learning from World War II, the courage, the refusal to give up in London. I think it's that which is my model of never, never, never giving up.